Operation Mincemeat, the dead spy who fooled Hitler. In 1943, a single dead man changed the course of World War II. No guns, no tanks, no airplanes. Just one lifeless body, a briefcase, and an idea so bold that it seemed impossible. An operation that would mislead the German High Command, save tens of thousands of Allied soldiers, and help turn the tide of the war. This is the incredible, true story of Operation Mincemeat, the plan that fooled Hitler himself. Chapter 1. The War in 1943. By the beginning of 1943, the war had entered a critical phase. The Axis powers, Germany, Italy and Japan, had once appeared unstoppable. But after the devastating defeat of German forces in North Africa, the Allies were preparing to strike at the soft underbelly of Europe. The Mediterranean Sea became the next major theatre of war. The Allied leaders, Churchill, Roosevelt and the British Chiefs of Staff, agreed that the next step should be the invasion of southern Europe, beginning with the island of Sicily. From there they could move north into Italy and perhaps open a new front that would draw German troops away from the Soviet Union in the east and from France in the west. But there was a problem. Sicily was the most obvious target. It sat right at the centre of the Mediterranean, a natural stepping stone from North Africa to mainland Europe. The Germans knew that too. If they correctly guessed that the Allies were coming to Sicily, they would fortify the island and prepare for battle. Casualty estimates were already frighteningly high. Something had to be done to divert German attention elsewhere. Chapter 2. The need for deception. Deception had long been a part of warfare, but in World War II it became a strategic art form. The British were masters of misdirection, from fake airfields and inflatable tanks in the deserts of Egypt to phony radio messages designed to confuse the enemy. But for the upcoming invasion, codenamed Operation Husky, they needed something bigger, something that would completely convince the Germans that the Allied attack would come somewhere else. The British intelligence agency, MI5, and the Naval Intelligence Division began searching for ways to trick German analysts into believing the invasion target was not Sicily, but perhaps Greece or Sardinia. Spain, though officially neutral, was crawling with German agents. If the Allies could plant false information in Spain, they were certain it would reach the Germans. In a memo known as the Trout Memo, written back in 1939 and attributed in part to Ian Fleming, who would later create James Bond, one idea stood out. A corpse dressed as an airman with dispatches in his pockets might be dropped on the coast, and the enemy, upon finding the body, would be misled. At the time, the suggestion was too bizarre to take seriously. But now, in 1943, desperate times called for bold ideas. Two officers from British Naval Intelligence decided to make that fantasy a reality. Chapter 3. The Mincemeat team. Lieutenant Commander Ewan Montague and Flight Lieutenant Charles Cholmondeley were the unlikely masterminds behind the plan. Montague, a barrister turned intelligence officer, was known for his meticulous attention to detail. Cholmondeley, an eccentric and imaginative officer, had a knack for thinking outside the box. Together they designed a deception operation so intricate and daring that it would become a legend in military history. They called it Operation Mincemeat. The plan was simple in concept but complex in execution. A dead body would be found off the coast of Spain carrying top-secret British documents that proved the Allies intended to invade Greece and Sardinia, not Sicily. The Germans, convinced of the document's authenticity, would shift their forces accordingly, leaving Sicily exposed. But first, they needed a body, a real human body. Chapter 4: Finding the Right Body. In early 1943, the search began. The body had to look like that of a drowned officer, one who might plausibly have died at sea and washed ashore. It had to be relatively intact, yet not freshly dead. Most importantly, there could be no obvious signs of foul play that might alert the Germans. Through a quiet arrangement with a coroner in London, they found their candidate, a 34-year-old Welshman named Glyndwr Michael. He had died after ingesting rat poison, either accidentally or intentionally, and no one knew for sure. His death had left him unclaimed and anonymous, which made him tragically the perfect choice. Montagu obtained official permission to use the body. The team knew they were treading on morally and legally delicate ground, but the stakes of the war justified it. They were about to turn Glyndwr Michael into someone else, into a hero who never lived. Chapter 5: Creating Major William Martin. The man they invented would be Major William Martin of the Royal Marines, a believable, respectable officer. He needed a backstory, personal effects, and most importantly, a reason to be carrying confidential documents. Montagu and Cholmondeley went to extraordinary lengths to make Major Martin real. They filled his pockets with personal letters, receipts, and small human details, the things spies often forget to fake. He had a fiancée named Pam, whose photograph was placed in his wallet. There were love letters from her, a ticket stub from a London theatre, and even a bill for a new shirt. There were ID cards, a bank statement, and a letter from his father. Each item had to look worn, handled, and natural, like the belongings of a man who had lived, not a prop in a play. The documents he carried were the heart of the operation. The key item was a letter from Lieutenant General Archibald Nye to General Alexander, discussing supposed plans for upcoming Allied operations in Greece and Sardinia. The tone of the letter was informal, full of military slang and inside references, carefully designed to sound authentic. Every single piece of paper was soaked in seawater and dried to mimic exposure to the elements. By the time they were finished, Major William Martin was as real as any officer who had ever lived. Glyndwr Michael had been reborn. Chapter 6: Preparing the Delivery. The next challenge was logistics. How could they get the body to the right place under the right circumstances? Spain was chosen because, although officially neutral, many Spanish officials, especially in the Navy, were sympathetic to the Germans. British intelligence knew that if a British body washed up on a Spanish beach, any documents found on it would quickly be shared with the Germans. The submarine HMS Seraph, commanded by Lieutenant Norman Jewell, was selected for the mission. The crew was told almost nothing, so only that they were carrying a special package for release off the Spanish coast. The body was preserved in dry ice, sealed inside a metal canister to slow decomposition. The crew joked grimly about the can of meat they were transporting, unaware that their mission's code name, Mincemeat, referred to exactly that. Before departure, Montagu and Cholmondeley personally inspected the body one last time. The uniform was perfect, the papers secure, the briefcase handcuffed to his wrist. They added a life jacket and a small silver cross. Then the container was sealed and loaded aboard the submarine. Chapter 7: The Drop. On the night of April the 29th, 1943, HMS Seraph surfaced near Huelva, a port city on Spain's southern coast. It was 4:30 in the morning. The crew quietly brought the canister up onto the deck, opened it, and carefully released the body into the dark sea. The tide carried Major Martin toward the shore. The submarine crew said a brief prayer, then turned away, leaving the Deception to take its course. At around 9:30 a.m. local time, Spanish fishermen spotted the body floating near the beach. They pulled it ashore and alerted the local authorities. The British consul in Huelva, acting his part perfectly, expressed great distress and demanded that the sensitive documents be returned to the British embassy. Of course, he knew exactly what was happening and what he wanted to happen. Chapter 8. The Germans take the bait. Within hours, Spanish intelligence had notified the German Abwehr, the Nazi intelligence service. German agents quickly obtained copies of the documents. They photographed every page, every signature, every smudge of salt water. The information was sent to Berlin and reviewed by German High Command. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, head of the Abwehr, personally endorsed the authenticity of the find. He reported directly to Hitler that the British were planning to invade Greece and Sardinia, not Sicily. Hitler believed it. Within days, German troops and aircraft were redeployed from Sicily to Greece and the Balkans. Even Field Marshal Erwin Rommel was ordered to prepare defences in the wrong place. The trap had worked. Chapter 9. The Invasion of Sicily. On July 9th, 1943, the Allied invasion of Sicily, Operation Husky, began. Despite rough seas and strong winds, the landings went far more smoothly than anyone had dared to hope. German and Italian forces on the island were confused, understrength and unprepared. Allied losses were less than 1/10 of what planners had feared. In just 38 days, Sicily was secured. The campaign that was expected to take 3 months had been won in little over 5 weeks. For the first time, the Allies had a foothold in Europe's mainland. Churchill later wrote, "In wartime, truth is so precious that she should always be attended by a bodyguard of lies." Operation Mincemeat was that bodyguard, a lie so convincing that it helped win a continent. Chapter 10. Aftermath and Secrecy. After the operation, Major William Martin was buried in Huelva with full military honours by the Spanish authorities. His tombstone read simply, "William Martin, Major, Royal Marines." Born 29th of March 1907, died 24th of April 1943. For decades, few knew that the man in the grave had never actually existed. The success of Operation Mincemeat was one of the most closely guarded secrets of the war. Even within British intelligence, only a handful of people knew the full story. To the outside world, it seemed as if the invasion of Sicily had succeeded by brilliant planning and luck. And perhaps it had. But beneath that success lay one of the most audacious acts of deception in history. Chapter 11. Revealing the Secret. It wasn't until 1953, 10 years later, that Ewan Montague was finally permitted to tell part of the story. His book, The Man Who Never Was, became an international bestseller and was adapted into a feature film in 1956. The public was fascinated by the idea that a single body had fooled Hitler and changed history. Yet even then, the full truth remained hidden. For decades, the identity of the real man, Glinda Michael, was kept secret out of respect for his memory and his family, who had never known how his body had been used. It was not until 1996 that British authorities officially acknowledged his name and added an inscription to his gravestone. Glyndwr Michael served as Major William Martin, Royal Marines. He was finally recognised, not as a victim, but as an unwitting hero. Chapter 12. The human side of deception. Operation Mincemeat was more than just a clever trick. It was an extraordinary blend of psychology, storytelling, and human insight. Montague and his team understood something fundamental about people, that the smallest details, a letter, a photo, a worn wallet, can make a lie believable. They knew that human minds look for consistency. When the Germans examined the documents, they didn't just see official letters. They saw the life of a man behind them, a man with a sweetheart, a man who shopped for shirts and wrote to his father, a man who seemed utterly real. And that realism was the operation's genius. It appealed not to logic but to emotion, and that's why it worked. To this day, military schools around the world study Operation Mincemeat as a textbook example of a strategic deception. Its lessons go beyond warfare. They show how empathy, understanding how others think and feel, can shape decisions and outcomes in any field. Chapter 13. The men behind the plan. Ewan Montague continued his career after the war as a respected judge and writer. He lived to see his creation become part of history. Though he rarely spoke of it in public, Charles Cholmondeley, the co-creator, returned to quiet military service, his contribution largely unrecognised until decades later. Both men understood that their success had depended not just on cleverness, but on meticulous teamwork and secrecy. Their story is a reminder that some of the greatest acts of courage in wartime happen far from the battlefield, in quiet offices, over typewriters and teacups, where ideas are weapons and imagination saves lives. Chapter 14. The cost and the impact. The entire operation cost the British government about £12,000, roughly the price of a single tank. For that small sum, they achieved one of the greatest strategic advantages of the war. German forces wasted time, resources and manpower fortifying places that would never be attacked. Meanwhile, the Allies gained a vital foothold in Europe, leading to the downfall of Mussolini and the eventual collapse of Nazi control in southern Europe. Operation Mincemeat may have shortened the war by months and saved thousands of lives, though we can never know the exact number. What is certain is that it changed the course of history. Chapter 15. Reflections and Legacy. When historians look back on World War II, they often focus on great battles, Stalingrad, Normandy, Midway, but history is also shaped by quieter moments, by imagination, deception and courage of a different kind. Operation Mincemeat reminds us that intelligence and creativity can be as powerful as guns and tanks. It shows how one small act, one strange and macabre idea can ripple through time and change the fate of nations. Today, the grave of Major William Martin still lies in the cemetery of Huelva, Spain. Visitors often leave flowers, British flags or handwritten notes. They come not to mourn, but to remember, to honour a man who never knew he was a hero, and to salute the minds who turned death into victory. Conclusion. The man who never was. Operation Mincemeat remains one of the most astonishing true stories of the Second World War. A reminder that truth and lies can sometimes walk hand in hand. It was a story of ingenuity, of sacrifice, and of the strange twists of fate that define human history. A story about how even in the darkest times, creativity and courage can change everything. Glinda Michael, the man who never was, rests today under a name that never belonged to him. But his story lives on, not as a tragedy, but as a triumph of imagination over brutality. He did not fight in the war, he did not choose his destiny, but through him thousands survived. Perhaps in the end, that is the most extraordinary legacy of all.